Hey, I believe there was a huge family influence that triggered your interest in this music that you grew to love. Tell us about those influences and the initial impact that the music of New Orleans had on you.
Well, a lot of it comes from my mum, really. She was that generation of young people in the 1950s that developed a taste for New Orleans jazz. And there was a scene that kind of blossomed with guys like Chris Barber, Ken Collier. And so growing up, there was always New Orleans jazz being played, and there are lots of little local jazz bands all over England. So I go with my mum and dad to hear the local old boys playing their version of New Orleans jazz. And then her younger brother, my uncle, moved to New Orleans in the 70s, in the early 70s. When he came back with lots of great stories and two suitcases full of 45s. And I would stay with him, and he would play me these obscure records and point out all the hip saxophone solos and the drum grooves. And so I got a really good education in New Orleans rhythm and blues when I was pretty young, when I was about 12. And I used to love going up to his place and just spending the whole night listening to music. And then my aunt was a lot younger, and she was the generation of the 70s, with big afros and hot pants and all that stuff. So she was really into the funk and soul music. So I got hip to Donny Hathaway and Dr. John, Right Place, Wrong Time, and the Meters, and a lot of great soul stuff, staple singers, Aretha Franklin. And so I got lots of family members. I got 3 grandparents that were musicians. My dad played. 3 uncles that played. So it would have been strange if I didn't come up playing music, but they were very encouraging. The family get-togethers, everybody would play, and I couldn't wait till I was up big enough to get my hands around the guitar neck to start joining in. And so that's kind of where it all started.
You did begin playing guitar. Was it simply a case of the fact that the music you loved featured piano so much that lured you to that instrument eventually?
Well, I started playing guitar when I was little, when I was about 5 years old. And I spent all my time playing. I would carry a guitar everywhere I went. I played till my fingers literally bled and the skin was hanging off. It was just such an enchanting mystery box, the whole music thing, how it worked, and just unraveling it and seeing the links between chords and the chord progressions in different keys. And I really liked, blues guitar. And all young kids like rocking out with guitar solos, and so I was really into all that. But I got to a point where I felt that I had to make a decision. I could either work into jazz, if I was going to keep getting better, but I didn't really dig jazz all that much as a guitar instrument. And then there was the kind of the whole rock thing and the Guitar Hero thing, and I could have gone that way. And at that point, I left and moved to New Orleans. When I got to New Orleans, I didn't have a guitar, but there was a piano in the house. And we had a piano growing up, so I always messed around with it, but now all my attentions were focused on the piano. And that actually was a more interesting instrument to me at that point, because the funk aspect of New Orleans music was what really pressed all my buttons, and the piano is just such a great funk machine.
Yeah.
It is a percussion instrument, really. And when I got to New Orleans, the music I was listening to was featured piano very heavily, and I just shifted streams and started fooling with the piano, and ended up by accident getting a couple of piano gigs, and that was it. I was a piano player.
I was reading another interview with you the other day, and you mentioned that you discovered an old school book of yours where you were about 11, and you stated in that book that you wanted to be a musician in New Orleans when you grew up. Having such a specific goal for a young lad at that age and having that focus, it must have had a lot to do with you going all the way as you have and achieving it.
That's what I wanted to do. As soon as I was old enough, I just wanted to go to this place that I heard so many stories about, and I was so familiar with the music. It's quite common in England when you leave school. A lot of people go on to university and take a gap year and you go traveling. So, everyone was talking about where they were going to go, and I said, I'm just going straight to New Orleans. I didn't really have a plan. In the back of my mind, I thought, wouldn't it be great to live in New Orleans and actually become a musician and, do it. But, I had no idea what to expect, and I turned up in New Orleans with about £100, thinking I had enough to last for a couple of weeks, and that maybe I'd dig it and go back again one day. But that was, I thought I was going for 2 weeks, and I'm still here, and that was 30-something years ago, so it was. I think I made the right choice. I don't regret it.
Do you think, looking back, maybe it was an advantage not going there with a plan, to just let things happen and see how it turned out? Yes, I was too young really to have a real kind of plan, but I just knew that I wanted to play music. I wanted to get better at what I did and get to meet other musicians that were on the same page. I grew up in a little village in the countryside, and I didn't really have anybody to play music with. I was quite precocious. I was a long way ahead of anybody else I knew at school that had guitars or anything, and so I was just hungry to get on with it. Yeah. And I played in a little band. I joined a band with a really good guitar player called Roger Hubbard in the south of England when I was about 15, I guess, 14 or 15. So I'd been gigging around for about 3 years playing in pubs. But it was limiting. I wanted to get immersed in the deep end of the real thing, because all the music I was listening to was black American music. And there were lots of very devoted fans of that music in England, but it was always something from somewhere else. It seemed very distant. I wanted to get to the source. I figured that's really that was obviously what I had to do. Yeah. Now, the Maple Leaf Bar was a significant venue for you shortly after your arrival. I think it was the first place you went for when you got there. Tell us about your early days there. Well, I landed on my feet. People were very, very kind, and I was incredibly lucky. I'd been given the phone number of a bar and the name of an English girl that was working behind the bar that was a friend of a friend of a friend. And so I was told that I could probably expect a bit of floor space for a few nights until I got myself sorted out. The bar was a music bar, and it was in a neighborhood of New Orleans called Carrollton, which had several other music bars within walking distance, so I wasn't old enough to drive. But I could walk across the street to Jed's, and on my very first day I walked into Jed's bar, literally across the street from the Maple Leaf, and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee were in there playing. The night I arrived, Earl King was playing. So, I mean, within my first 24 hours I'd seen Earl King and Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee. I mean, it was just, you can't imagine how exciting it was. Yeah. So, the Maple Leaf was run by an eccentric character who realized I needed some work, and he gave me a job painting the bar, and then I started earning money, and then I got someone at the bar so he can come stay at my place, and one thing led to another. Before long, I was living there happily and working. I used to listen to a lot of music, but I wasn't really doing any gigs at first. I didn't really feel qualified, and I'm never much of a hustler, really, at trying to blag my way on stage, so I would yearn to get up and play. And by coincidence, at the Maple Leaf on Tuesday nights at that time, arguably one of the best piano players that ever came out of New Orleans had a regular gig. Not that he was very well known at the time. James Booker was his name. Oh, wow. He's a legendary character, but at the time he would play on Tuesdays, and there'd be 10 or 15 people in there. And he was notorious for getting too loaded to play, and sometimes wouldn't show up at all. And then one night when I was cleaning all the paintbrushes up, the audience was in there waiting for James Booker to play, and he just didn't show. So the Bones said, "Get up on the piano and keep him all here until he shows up." And so I suddenly found myself bashing away on the 5 or 6 tunes that I could actually play. Everyone seemed to really dig it, so I just kept on doing it. That was my first gig, covering for James Booker. It must have been difficult as a young lad arriving there not to be overwhelmed by it all, to suddenly have all this music that you've loved in your childhood suddenly there at your fingertips. Well, it was the whole package, really. It wasn't just the music. The architecture here is so beautiful. Yeah. Food it's like food I hadn't tasted before. You have to understand, this was 1981, at a time when travel to the United States was very expensive and not really a holiday option that most people
could afford, they would go over to France or Spain if they're going to go overseas. But to go to America was a big deal. I only knew a few people at school who had been to America. Nowadays, people hop on planes and go all over the place. It's not a big deal, but I really felt a long, long, long way from home. So the whole thing was a complete culture shock, and music was just part of that, really. You know, the climate here is so hot. I wasn't used to being this hot. I loved it. And I was, 17 or 18 years old without parental supervision in a town that was completely wide open. So it was great. I mean, it was like being a kid in a toy shop. Yeah. So music was just a part of the whole package, really.
Sure. If you had to write a dictionary definition or describe the music of New Orleans to the uninitiated, how would you put it?
Well, you could describe it in several ways. You could talk about the actual structure of the music, what makes it different, but I think perhaps the most important thing is that, funk and jazz, this is the local folk music, it's the ethnic folk music of New Orleans, if you like. And it's just so good and so much fun that it got adopted by everybody else, and it went worldwide. I mean, got as far back as Louis Armstrong, or even before Louis Armstrong, the early jazz records that came out, and aficionados were picking them up. With the advent of rock and roll, it was the New Orleans cats that really were the trailblazers in many ways. Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis was from Louisiana, Little Richard. I mean, those Little Richard records were made in the French Quarter, on the next street over from where I'm sitting right now. That's what people do down here, and the music from here is an essential part of the culture of the city, and it's the way people let off steam and have a good time. And in New Orleans, you've got to have a lot of fun at what you're doing. You've got to generate a lot of fun from the stage, and there's also an onus on being really a good craftsman, playing your instrument really well, taking pride in really being able to play. And there's a lot of disproportionately large amount of great musicians and very funky musicians. And the funk thing in New Orleans comes from its African roots and the European roots too. It's varied. You could listen to, I could play 4 New Orleans records, and you'd say, well, to the uninitiated, you'd say, well, they all sound completely different. So there's not just one style. There's lots of different styles that came out from this place, but they're all rooted in rhythm.
Yeah. And
a clever use of the blue notes in harmony. And New Orleans generates a good time feeling. This is always a party town. So if you go and see a New Orleans band playing anywhere, you better bring your dancing shoes and get ready to have a good time out. And that's kind of what I dig with it. And wherever we play in the world, it translates. It doesn't matter if we're in Japan, Australia, playing in Europe, or even just around other cities in the United States. The minute you play this stuff, even if it's to a bunch of people who perhaps aren't familiar with it, everyone gets it straight away. It's good. It's just good stuff.
Yeah, I think that the fun and the joyful element is the standout there. I can't even associate sadness and sorrow with the music of New Orleans.
Well, they the blues is something you associate with Mississippi, and Texas, and Chicago, and all these things are linked. There's no dividing line really. All the edges are blurred. Gospel music too. And in New Orleans, they play the blues. But when they play the blues in New Orleans, it's melancholy, because it has a city with a very sad history. But it always somehow, in the hands of New Orleans musicians, the blues always have a positive side to it too. It's not wallowing in depression.
Yeah.
It's not a downer. But when you play the blues down here, it still makes you want to get up and swoon and dance.
Yeah. Have you ever pondered how your life and career would have panned out had you been born and raised in New Orleans rather than been drawn to it from across the ocean?
I have actually. That's a really good question, because of course, for me, New Orleans is totally exotic. It was the other, totally unrelated to what my life experience had been growing up in a very tiny town in the Kentish countryside. And I think that's a general truism that people are always attracted by something that's unfamiliar, something that has an exotic quality to it. And a lot of for people who were born and raised in New Orleans, of course, this is just completely normal.
Yeah.
Everywhere else it seems exotic. So I think when I arrived, it surprised me that there weren't kids or people of my generation, seemingly, that showed much of an interest. Local New Orleanian musicians. The rhythm and blues was seen as something that was that's what your parents listened to. It's likely that if I'd been born and raised here, I probably would have wanted to be playing English punk rock or something. So I'm glad it was the other way around.
Yeah. You received a Grammy recently for Go-Go Juice. Tell us about the whole Grammy experience for you.
Well, part of the attraction of New Orleans for me was always that it was below the radar. Not many people seem to really know about it. It wasn't really a tourist destination when I came here. And I felt sort of privy to a well-kept secret. So the Grammy world and the music business as it exists has always been something that takes place in Nashville or Los Angeles or New York. And New Orleans was this sort of physically remote part of the States, all the way down south in Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico. And it was always, lagging behind, which is part of the attraction of the place. It always felt like you'd gone back in time when you came here. And the Grammy thing, the music business as such, is something that's never actually really appealed to me very much. I like the music. I don't, the commercial pop music stuff didn't really do very much for me. And so to get a Grammy was bizarre. I just didn't see it coming. We got nominated for it, and that was a surprise. And then when I was there and they actually called out that I won it, I couldn't believe it. I just thought, this is bizarre. This is very interesting. So, I found the whole thing very novel. It's quite nice. Nice, very flattering to be given something lovely like that.
Yeah.
As I say, it's not really anything I really aspired to, but certainly pleased to have it.
Sure.
To have been given it.
Were you comfortable with the category that they put you in? Best Regional Roots category, I think it was.
Yeah, I don't even know what categories are in music. I deal in notes. Categories are ways that are tools that people use to market stuff. It's a business thing. If you're a musician, the lines between all these different things are blurred. So all the categories there, I don't really know what half of them mean. I mean, when people ask me what I play, I say I play rhythm and blues. That's what they called it here in New Orleans. They didn't call it rock and roll in the 50s. Everyone locally called it rhythm and blues. That's what it is. It's rhythm mixed in with the blues. It's funky blues music. Sure. But rhythm and blues in the Grammy sense means Beyonce and Jay-Z and all that sort of stuff. The meaning's changed totally. So, I think I don't really know what rock. I don't know what it means, but I left it to my managers to decide what category to enter it in, and I think they must have made the right choice.
Yeah. And that album included contributions from the great Alan Toussaint, one of his final works before his passing. I'm sure that's something that's always going to make that album something very special for you.
Well, he's been one of my musical mentors since day one, really. His stamp was on so much of the stuff that came from New Orleans. And after Katrina, he sort of resurfaced. He'd always been fairly reclusive. And we got to work together on a couple of tours. We came out to Australia one time and played Sydney Opera House. Did an Australian tour with my band and his band and the Dirty Dozen Brass Band. And then I toured in the States with him and Henry Butler, another local piano player, 3 pianos. So he was always very friendly to me. He was a very shy person. But when we were doing Go-Go Juice and decided we'd like to use horns, which I haven't really used for the previous few records, I said, well, it would be great if Alan would do them. And shortly before that, I'd made a record of Alan Toussaint songs. And I'm sure from his point of view, he was thinking, oh no, what's he going to do? But it turns out that he was a big fan of the record and he liked it. So when I asked him if he would do some horns on the album, he very kindly said yes. And it's lovely to have that stamp on there. And sadly, as you know, we lost him shortly afterwards.
Yeah. Do you have a preferred method of recording an album? Do you like to, for example, keep it nice and simple and spontaneous? Is that a priority for you in the studio?
Well, making a record is not the same as doing a gig. And New Orleans musicians are great at getting on stage and entertaining a room. And part of the appeal of New Orleans music is it's always fairly chaotic. It reflects the city. Making a record requires a different set of disciplines. When you play a gig, every note you play disappears into the ether, and it's history instantly. It's gone. And you take lots of chances, and you can stretch out and make mistakes and do this, that, and the other. And everyone's dancing around in the club and having a good time. And you can't do that in a studio. Or even you can do that in the studio, but the studio also allows you to look at more detail and think, we're actually not doing a gig, we're making a record here. And records, if they're going to get played on the radio, are usually songs are usually about 4.5 minutes long. So the arrangements are important, how you start the song is important, what you introduce throughout the course of the song to keep the listener's ears stimulated is very important, and you employ a whole different set of tools, and it can be quite intimidating. And very often, if you go into a studio and play a gig, you end up with something that doesn't necessarily make a good record. And so that's always been interested me, and I decided very early on, when the technology became available, to start buying gear so I could work at home and try out ideas. Studios cost a lot of money, good studios, and if you're spending $1,500 a day and just decide to try out something on a whim, you could spend $3,000 on a whim that you end up saying, oh, well, that was good fun trying it, but it didn't actually work, so let's do something else. I don't have the luxury of those sort of recording budgets. Yeah. So I do a lot of work in preparation before we even go in the studio. I usually record the songs, make sure I've got the right key, the right tempo, try out different sequences of verses and choruses, try out different instrumentation, different grooves, different feels, until I get the ones that are closest to what I initially heard in my head when I wrote the song. And then I give those to the musicians, and they go away and learn them. And I usually at home, when I'm in my studio, I play all the instruments, do all the parts, so I get everything just the way I want. But then I get the best musicians available, and we go in and with that preparation we say, right, okay, now let's cut this tune. And at that point, I rely on the expertise of the musicians and a good producer to make good suggestions so that we can make it even better than the first cut. So it's complicated process.
Yeah.
But I have a studio in my house, and I spend a lot. I'm working right now on an edit for the new record, and it's great. I have my playroom downstairs: pianos, drums, basses, guitars, microphones, the whole lot. A nice big room, and it's making records is a lot of fun. I enjoy doing it. I'm lucky; I get to do both.
Yeah.
But as I say, they're different disciplines.
You pay homage to a style of music that has a rich history, but you do it in a style that still has your own stamp on it. Is providing your own songs, your own material, an important part of achieving that, rather than just be a human New Orleans jukebox covering the classics?
I think it's if you're going to be a musician in New Orleans, then you have to learn the book. You've got to. You don't have to, but I wanted to get as much of 100 years of New Orleans music to cram into my little brain, and so I've got a sort of a mental repository of thousands of riffs, thousands of styles, thousands of little lessons that I've learned and picked up on. You could have a lot of fun going and just playing the old tunes, and I've done that a few times. But I think for something to stand the test of time, it's better that you try and put something of yourself into it, something that's uniquely you.
Yeah.
And you can spend a career trying to find your own voice, especially when you have so many influences. But I think you absorb, if you're good at it, then the musical part of your brain is like a sponge that just soaks up as much as possible. And it's stored there, and then every time you sit down to play, the ideas just come unbidden. It's a sum total of all your experience. And the hope is that by the time it's come through your unique set of filters, that it sounds like you. And I'm very proud. You can tell when you listen to my music, you can tell where all the influences are. I have no problem with that. But I do try and write new songs where possible. And with a new song, then that's always got something of your stamp on it, and that brings out the flavors that you want. So I would hope that the records will stand the test of time. We'll have a distinct style.
Right. Jon, look, thanks so much for your time. I know I've got to let you go shortly. We're really looking forward to seeing you here. You're much loved here in Australia, and we always look forward to every visit.
I love coming to play in Australia. The audiences are great. They're very hip about good stuff. They know their stuff, and they're always ready to get down parties. It's a bit like playing for a New Orleans audience. That's why I feel at home in Australia, because they know how to party properly. We're really looking forward to it, man. It's been a couple of years since we were last there, so it's going to be a lot of fun.
And the full band coming with you?
Yeah, I'm bringing this cat you should know about called Nigel Hall, who moved to New Orleans from Washington, D.C. about 5 years ago, and he's one of my favorite musicians on the planet. And a bit like me, he plays all the different instruments, and he's a really good songwriter and performer in his own right. But we have a lot of fun playing together, so I'm going to bring him along. So we'll have Nigel Hall on keyboards. He'll be playing B3 and clavinet. Cornell Williams, who's been playing with me for 20-something odd years, who's from a gospel background, one of the absolute monster gentlemen. And then I'm bringing this new drummer, young upcoming lion here in New Orleans called A.J. Hall, who's phenomenal. Plays a lot of soul. He's also a great bass player and a great singer. If you're going to be in my band, you have to be a good singer. That's one of the main requirements. So, it's a really good, really strong selection of musicians. If I have any talent at all, it's picking good guys to play with.
Yeah,
so everyone's coming out to the gigs. You're in for a treat. It's going to be a lot of fun.
We can't wait. That's fantastic. Thanks again, Jon. Have a safe flight over.
Pleasure.
We'll see you in November.
I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to have some fun.
We're here ready and waiting. All the best.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.